Hello, this is Heather Deacon, Director of Business Affairs and Treasurer for National Capital Presbytery, and I am excited to share with you the 2023 budget presentation. During our time, I'm going to walk you through how the budget is developed, the presentation of both our operating and our mission budgets, and then leave you with some action items. As Presbyterians, we believe in the connectional nature of the church. We are connected by our polity and obviously by our faith, but we are also, at least in National Capital Presbytery, connected by our budgets. So I'd like to show you what that looks like. If we start with the money, we have three main sources: the faithful witness of yesterday's saints, and that often takes the form of endowments. We also have funds received from dissolutions and from property sales. And then we have funds received from our churches. These typically come in as unified giving, per capita, and special offerings. And even within these sources, we can see the connections. And then as the money flows through the budget, we see the same patterns emerge. As a presbytery, generally, we support growth opportunities, ministries of our churches, and then leadership development. And just as before, you see the connections between these three areas. As you prayerfully consider these budgets, I hope that the idea that our budgets connect us as a presbytery to each other and to our churches and to our communities stays in the forefront of your minds. As we dive into this presentation, we're going to start with how the budget is developed. And that really falls into three main categories: the budget guidance memo, the committee requests, and then the funding plan. The process starts with Budget and Finance Committee developing the guidance memo. In doing this, they evaluate and analyze the economic landscape. They look at our giving trends. And as Presbyterians, we have lots of records and data. And the committee really uses that information to develop the draft. We are all cognizant on some level of what is going on in the economy right now with inflation and the markets. And so it should come as no surprise that this year's guidance memo recommended that committees make reductions where possible. The committees and the commissions get that memo and they review their current year budget and assess the work they are being called to do in 2023. And then they determine the resources that are needed to do that work. Those requests come back to Budget and Finance, and then the committee begins compiling the budgets. And as a side note, this is a huge place where your voice can be heard. If you want to see a priority in these budgets that isn't there, you are encouraged to get involved with that committee and to use your voice to make that change. I know that the nominating committee stands ready to help match your gifts and your passions with the work that needs to be done in our committee and on our commissions. All right, once that request has been received and input into the budget, Budget and Finance begins creating the funding plan. And that plan really has two big components: the recommended annual draws off of our investments, that comes from the investment committee, and then the per capita rate. Once the funding plan is input into the budgets are ready to be reviewed. And that starts with the Budget and Finance Committee reviewing and voting on drafts. From there, the Leadership Council reviews and votes on those draft budgets. And then that brings us to where we are now. It's time for Presbytery to review and vote on those budgets. And then that step will lead us towards having our finalized budgets. You've heard me mention budgets, plural, and so I hope that everyone is aware, but just in case you aren't, National Capital Presbytery has two budgets. We have the operating budget and the mission budget. And so speaking in broad strokes, our operating budget funds National Capital Presbytery staff, the Presbytery office space, office expenses. It funds the committee or the Commission on Ministry, COM, and the Commission on Preparation for Ministry, CPM. And then it funds the various middle governing body expenses. The mission budget funds National Capital Presbytery mission staff. It funds the Congregational Development Committee or Commission, CDC, and the Mission Coordination Committee. And then finally, it funds some other various groups and functions that you can find in the mission budget itself. We'll start with the operating budget, and as you can see from this graphic, the operating budget funds a variety of things. I'm not going to list them all here for you, but I encourage you to take a look at the 2023 draft budget and our 2022 impact report, which does a phenomenal job of outlining what is funded through which budget. For simplicity's sake, I like to say that the operating budget covers all of the things that it takes to actually run the presbytery and its office and to meet our responsibilities as laid out through our polity. The 2023 operating budget, as proposed, is $1,116,639.17, which represents a 4.5% increase. I am going to review a few of the highlights in the budget, but I really recommend that you all do a good read through for yourselves. The office expenses are coming in with a 2% increase. The largest drive of this increase is our office space lease, which per terms increases in rent a small amount each year. That lease is up in December of 2024. Office salaries are also coming in with a 2% increase. The recommendation from personnel is that staff receives a 3% cost of living increase, which is included in this budget. We aren't recognizing the impact of the full 3% due to tweaks in staffing that were made during the 2022 year and then are now reflected in that 2023 draft budget. That's why you see the difference between a 2% overall increase in the budget versus the 3% cost of living increase that's being proposed for staff. The Board of Pensions is by far going to be the largest increase in our operating budget this year. There were internal staffing changes that resulted in a larger insurance cost, and Board of Pensions increased clergy dues by 2%, and then non-clergy insurance costs increased 9.5% over 2022. The Commission on Ministry, or COM, is down 12%, and this is due almost entirely to a continued reconciliation of expenses versus actuals, and then continuing to realize the pandemic has shifted the way that we operate. Middle governing body expenses were down 8%, and these include things like our legal expenses, our communications, leadership council, worship and theology. Much like COM, this reduction comes from aligning our expenses with our actuals in the wake of the pandemic. When we talk about funding the operating budget, we really have four sources. We have the office fund, the retreat fund, the scholarship fund, and then we have per capita. The office fund was established to offset the costs of operating expenses, and the current balance in that fund is $714,589. The recommended draw from that fund is $175,000. We are aware that the fund is shrinking. The largest driver of this draw each year is the office space lease, which, as I mentioned earlier, is up in December of 2024. And so consequently, reevaluating our office space needs as this lease expires will be a big part of addressing this fund. The retreat fund has historically funded what was known as the Calm to the Waves retreat, recognizing that this fund was approaching depletion. In 2022, the Calm to the Waves retreat was reworked to become a continuing education event, and it was a huge success. The 2023 draw will exhaust the fund, but we feel that the continuing education model will allow this to be an event that continues on past the life of this fund. The scholarship fund supports seminarians coming out of National Capital Presbytery, and it is administered by CPM. The three draws that you see on the screen here are really right in alignment with our historical draws. There's very little change to the numbers over the past several years. And that leaves us then with per capita. And while it is last on this list, that is not because it is the least important, but rather because of how we calculate the rate each year. Essentially, we back into the number. Once we have the expenses and then we deduct the investment draws, we're left with the need. And that remaining need, that number, is divided by the membership of National Capital Presbytery churches from 2 years prior. So in this case, the membership number of 2021. Calculating per capita last allows us to hopefully minimize the financial impact as much as possible to our churches. On the screen, you see here a graph of our membership in National Capital Presbytery since 2010. And the numbers, they reflect what we know to be true. Our membership is shrinking. Each governing body, General Assembly, the Synod, National Capital Presbytery, they assess per capita on membership numbers from 2 years prior. So 2023 per capita is assessed on 2021 membership numbers for all the bodies. And the 2021 membership number for our presbytery decreased by 969 members. Each of these governing bodies will set a per capita rate to cover their expenses, and the sum of those three amounts is the total per capita amount that's assessed on each member. And so here you see the per capita recommendation. We have General Assembly coming in at $9.85. We have the Synod at $1.15. And we have National Capital Presbytery coming in at $36.13. And those three numbers combine to equal the proposed per capita rate of $47.13. We have both General Assembly and National Capital Presbytery proposing increases to the per capita rate. For reference, last year's total per capita amount was $42.67. So the 2023 proposed rate reflects a combined increase of $4.46. And when we talk about per capita historically, National Capital Presbytery raises its per capita about $1 a year to offset the rising expenses and then shrinking membership. National Capital Presbytery has not raised per capita for 3 years. And this was done intentionally to provide maximum flexibility for our congregations to address the pandemic landscape. So when we look at the proposed increase, we know automatically that $2 comes as a result of holding per capita flat. We know that 87 cents comes from the General Assembly increase, which leaves $1.59 due to an increase in expenses and inflation, as well as the decrease in membership. So as we finish up the 2023 operating budget, I want to leave you with just a couple of actions. Please review the operating budget details in the budget packet. And then come with any questions to the action item dialogue on Monday, November 14th, ahead of the November Presbytery meeting on the 15th. You are welcome to email any questions to the NCP office. And then lastly, I just want to share with you on the screen, you see the motion that you will be asked to vote on at the November Presbytery meeting. Now we are going to turn over to the mission budget. And just like with the operating budget, you'll see on this graphic some of the fantastic things that the mission budget funds. I'm going to recommend that you take a look at the 2023 draft budget in the packet. And again, our 2022 impact report, which really has great detail about what each of our budgets support. Generally speaking, the mission budget does just what it says. It funds the mission priorities, not only of National Capital Presbytery as kind of a whole, but of the churches that make up our presbytery. The 2023 mission budget, as proposed, is $891,336.66, which represents a 9% decrease over 2022. Again, I'm going to review a few of the highlights, but please go back and look at your packet on your own to do your own review. The Commission on Congregational Development, CDC, reduced their expenses by 11%. A big part of that is instituting a grant cycle or grant system for our fellowships, and then aligning the transforming congregation grants with the need that has been submitted over 2022. The Mission Coordinating Committee presented a 10% reduction in their expenses, and MCC undertook really a major restructuring in their budget this year. And then, much like CDC, they are instituting a grant funding system for many of their nonprofit partners. So when you look at the mission budget, specifically with MCC and with CDC and their sections, you're going to see a lot of strike-throughs through different line items. And by and large, this is because the respective grant funding systems that each entity is placing for their specific line items. So I want you to be aware of that when you're looking at the budgets, that's why it looks that way. Other support is down 18%. And while there are a few different things that kind of go into this area of the mission budget, this decrease is due primarily to a anticipated reduction in the cost of the anti-racism and allyship trainings that we have been providing over 2021 and 2022. Staff salaries and Board of Pensions increased by 2.7% and 8.5% respectively. And just like in the operating budget, these are a result of the 3% cost of living increase for staff, and then an increase in the Board of Pensions dues for 2023. When we talk about funding the mission budget, we have really five sources. We have unified giving, we have the NCP Resurrection Fund, the DC Resurrection Fund, the New Growth Fund, and then we have mission reserves. Unified giving is a separate thing from per capita. It is money that is given specifically by our churches to support the mission of the presbytery. Participation in unified giving is a vital part of living into the connected nature of our presbytery. These dollars flow out into our communities through our congregations, connecting our churches to each other through shared work. We're going to talk a little bit more about unified giving, but it really is a critical part of funding the mission budget. Next, you have the NCP and DC Resurrection Funds, and draws off of the interest of these funds provide a consistent layer of funding to the mission budget. On the screen here, you can see the current balance in both, as well as the anticipated draws off of these funds for 2023. The new growth fund specifically funds seed money for new projects and work done with the New Things team, which falls under the direction of CDC, and the anticipated draw and current balance are shown on the screen as well. Lastly, we have mission reserves, and these reserves are from years past when the entire mission budget wasn't spent. So it's excess funds that were budgeted and not spent going into the mission reserves. For the last few years, we balance the budget with the mission reserves. We balance the mission budget with those reserves. And as you can see, the reserves are diminishing. We are actively working to create a plan to address this. However, the quickest and the easiest thing that can happen would be to see an increase in unified mission giving. And then again, the draws that you see on the screen are normal draws from the funds. There was nothing abnormal about the amounts that were taken off the funds or anticipated taking off the funds for 2023. On this slide here, you see the trend in unified mission giving. That's the dollars that fund our congregational development, our tech grants, our mission grants, our college ministry programs, our fellowships. That giving is down 29% over 10 years. And so this year, when we started digging just a little bit deeper into this number and this trend, we found that of the 103 churches in our presbytery, 37 had not contributed to unified giving since 2018. For 2022, we are tracking between a 5 and 8% decrease in giving over 2021. And so because of this, the 2023 budget is built off of an assumption that there will be an 8% reduction in giving for that year. And so as we wrap up the mission budget, you again have a couple of actions. Good news is they are identical to the actions for the operating budget. Review the mission budget details, which are included in the budget packet, and then come with any questions to the action item dialogue that is on November the 14th. That's the Monday night before the November Presbytery meeting. Again, we welcome any emails with questions to the NCP office. And then lastly, you see that you have the motion that you'll be asked to vote on at that November Presbytery meeting on the screen here. So as we wrap up this 2023 budget presentation, I want to take us back to the slide that we started with, and the idea that our budget is one of the things that connects us to each other. And as we reflect on that idea that our budget connects us and how we are called to participate in that connection, I just want to add that the work that is being done by us, by our churches, in our presbytery, in our communities, is all done in support of our mission to be missional and pastoral and prophetic so that our churches can grow.